what exactly did Ham do to his father Noah in Genesis 9 while Noah was inebriated and passed out and uncovered within his tent? It's basically three different ways that this is explained. There's some fringe explanations, but I'm going to focus on the three that we hear for the most part. So the context is after the flood, and Noah has planted a vineyard. He's harvested the fruit. He's made wine. He had too much of it. He's in his tent now, and he is not only passed out, but he's uncovered. He's unclothed. And we read in Genesis 9, verse 22, that one of his sons, Ham, who's the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and he told his two brothers outside. Now remember that phrase, saw the nakedness. We'll come back to that in a minute. The first explanation is that this is a case of voyeurism. Ham goes in, he sees his father's nakedness, he doesn't cover him up. Worse, he goes outside, he blabs about it to his two brothers, and so this is a case of filial impiety, and he thus dishonored his father. Now, the strength of the argument is it takes the text just literally. He saw the nakedness of his father, and he tells his brothers outside. The weakness of this argument is that it's difficult to explain, therefore, why, when Noah woke up and realized what had been done to him, that he utters a curse against Canaan, not Ham, but Canaan, who is the son of Ham. Now, I think there's ways that you can explain that, but that is both the strength and the weakness of that particular explanation. The other two explanations say that, much more went on than that. That when we hear that phrase, saw the nakedness, we should understand that euphemistically, meaning that when Ham went in, he violated, if you know what I mean, he violated either his father or his mother. How so? Well, here's how the argument goes. If you take that phrase in Hebrew, see the nakedness, and you go to passages such as one in Leviticus 20, there it's used in the context of a sibling-to-sibling case of illicit union, where when one sees the nakedness of another, a brother, the sister, and a sister, her brother, that this is a case where you have a sexual sin involved, an incestuous union between these two. So those who will read Leviticus 20 will take that understanding back into Genesis chapter 9 and say, well, yeah, it's not just with the eyes that he sinned, but he did something to his father, because that same phrase is used in Leviticus 20 in an obvious case where something is happening physically. Now, that's one particular argument. I'm going to cover the other one too, and then I'll demonstrate what I think is the greatest weakness of these kinds of arguments. The other argument that Ham didn't do something to his father, but he did something to his mother, is based upon the same kind of understanding, except with a twist. So if you go to Leviticus 20, that same text that talks about this brother to sister kind of forbidden relationship, you also have another Hebrew phrase that occurs, not just see the nakedness, but uncover the nakedness of someone. Now that is a Hebrew euphemism that means to, engage in this illicit kind of union, except the twist is that if you uncover the nakedness of your father, that actually means that you had this illicit union with your mother. So to uncover the nakedness of X is actually not to do something to that person, but to their spouse. So the argument goes, seeing the nakedness is used in parallel with uncovering the nakedness in Leviticus 20. Leviticus 18 has many sections that talk about uncovering the nakedness. And so using those phrases to interpret Genesis chapter 9, those who advocate for this position say, actually what happened was Ham went in and he saw the nakedness of his father, meaning, based upon this Leviticus 18 and 20 passages, that he actually violated his mother. Now, the strength of those positions is that, first of all, it uses the Hebrew idioms and Hebrew euphemisms from Leviticus to interpret this, and it's always good to let Scripture interpret Scripture. Another strength is that we have multiple occasions in Genesis where you have these kinds of physical acts happening where it's a fall into sin. I mean, think of the patriarchs and their wives, think of Lot and his daughters, think of Judah and his daughter-in-law. There's a lot of cases in Genesis where you have these sinful actions connected with intercourse, illicit intercourse, all right? Those are the strengths of this argument. What about a weakness of both these arguments, that Ham did something either to his father or to his mother? Well, the greatest weakness is in the very next verse. That next verse says that the other two brothers of Ham, Shem and Japheth, took a garment, laid it on their shoulders, and they walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. Now, obviously, in verse 23, this is to be taken literally. They didn't see their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned backward. They walked backwards. They covered them up so they wouldn't literally see their father's nakedness. That's the very next verse. So if to see nakedness is to be interpreted literally in verse 23, then why would we interpret it euphemistically in the previous verse? Context matters, right? And so if you have the same expression, seeing the nakedness, which in verse 23 obviously refers to something literal, then shouldn't we assume that it also refers to something literal in the verse prior to it, in verse 22? I think so. So I think any argument that he actually did something either to Noah or to Noah's wife falls apart when you get to verse 23, when you have that same expression used in a very literal sort of way, just a visual kind of action. Now, there's much more that we could say about this text, but this video has already gone for 6 minutes. But I wanted to give you just kind of a rundown then of the various ways you can understand these actions in Genesis chapter 9. Either it's voyeurism or Ham actually did something physically violated either his mother or his father. Now, for my money, I go with the voyeuristic argument. I think even though it has its weaknesses, it also has the greatest strength because it takes the text literally and it uses the very language of verse 23 to understand what is meant by Ham's action in verse 22. Feel free to let me know your opinion in the comments. Thanks for watching.